Crazy Eddie, 1971-1989, his prices are insane. When people in New York during the 1970s and 1980s heard the words, his prices are insane, one brand immediately came to mind, Crazy Eddie. What began as a modest electronics shop in Brooklyn in 1971 quickly grew into a retail phenomenon that seemed unstoppable. The company became famous for its unforgettable TV commercials, featuring an actor who shouted with manic energy, convincing viewers that they were witnessing the cheapest deals imaginable. The ads were loud, relentless, and unlike anything consumers had seen before. At its peak, Crazy Eddie wasn't just a store, it was a cultural icon across the New York metropolitan area. The brand's success rested on three pillars: aggressive marketing, rapid expansion, and the growing demand for home electronics in the 1970s. Televisions, stereos, VCRs, and cassette decks were no longer luxury items. They were becoming essential for middle-class households. Crazy Eddie tapped into this wave by promising deals that seemed too good to be true, and often they were. By the early 1980s, the company had expanded into a chain of more than 43 stores, dominating the electronics retail scene in the region. But behind the flashy commercials and crowded showrooms, Crazy Eddie was built on a foundation of fraud and deception. Founder Eddie Antar and his family operated the business as if it were a personal cash machine. Massive tax evasion schemes allowed them to skim money from the registers, laundering profits through offshore accounts. Even when the company went public in 1984, the Antar family manipulated the books to inflate earnings and attract investors. To Wall Street, Crazy Eddie appeared like a rocket ship ready to challenge national retailers. In reality, it was a ticking time bomb. Competition also played a role in its downfall. Chains like Circuit City and Best Buy were beginning to expand aggressively with larger stores, better supply chains, and more professional management. Crazy Eddie's chaotic internal operations couldn't keep up. Inventory was mismanaged, customer complaints grew, and the once insane prices didn't always live up to the hype. The final collapse came in 1989, when auditors and investigators uncovered the massive accounting fraud. The company had inflated its profits by over $80 million, one of the largest cases of financial misconduct in retail history at the time. Investors lost everything, employees were left jobless, and Eddie Antar fled to Israel in an attempt to avoid justice. He was eventually extradited back to the United States, where he faced prison time for his crimes. Crazy Eddie remains one of the most infamous cautionary tales in American business history. What seemed like a brilliant retail empire was nothing more than smoke and mirrors. For consumers, it was a reminder that insane prices often come with an insane cost. For business students and investors, it became a textbook example of corporate fraud, poor governance, and the dangers of unchecked hype. E.J. Corvette, 1948-1980. The discount revolution that derailed when Eugene Furkoff opened the first E.J. Corvette in New York in 1948, few could have imagined how disruptive his idea would be to the retail industry. At the time, department stores dominated shopping culture. They were elegant, expensive, and firmly rooted in the idea that customers would pay premium prices for the prestige of buying in a big downtown store. But Furkoff had a different vision. He wanted to bring department store variety at discount store prices to the everyday American. With the help of his partner, Joe Swillenberg, the duo launched what became one of the most influential discount chains of the mid-20th century. The name itself sparked curiosity. E.J. stood for Eugene and Joe, while Corvette was a play on Corvette, the small naval warship designed to suggest speed, agility, and power. Rumors spread that the company was somehow linked to the elite Chevrolet Corvette sports car, but that was never the case. What truly mattered was that Corvettes was a pioneer of discount retailing. At a time when many states still had fair trade laws requiring stores to sell goods at minimum prices, Corvettes found ways around the restrictions by operating as a membership-based cooperative. This allowed them to sell name-brand goods at 20% to 40% below traditional department store prices, attracting middle-class shoppers in droves. By the 1960s, E.J. Corvette had become a retail giant with 58 stores, mostly concentrated along the East Coast. It offered everything from clothing and appliances to records, furniture, and sporting goods. For many families, shopping at Corvette's was both a bargain and a cultural event. Parents would load their kids into the car, drive to a suburban Corvette's location, and stock up on household essentials while browsing aisles filled with the newest trends. The stores were often sprawling, reflecting the new suburban lifestyle of post-war America. But success came at a cost. By the 1970s, cracks in the empire were showing. The first problem was overexpansion. In the race to dominate discount retail, Corvettes opened too many stores too quickly, often in poorly chosen locations. Some suburban malls thrived, but others struggled to generate traffic, leaving Corvettes with large, underperforming spaces that drained resources. The second issue was loss of identity. Corvettes started as a revolutionary discount store, but as competition grew, it tried to compete directly with traditional department stores like Macy's and Gimbel's. This shift confused customers. Was Corvettes a bargain destination, or was it trying to be a full-service department store? The result was a muddled brand that no longer stood out in the increasingly crowded retail landscape. The 1970s recession hit the chain hard. Inflation soared, unemployment rose, and consumers tightened their wallets. Unlike Walmart, which was beginning its steady national rise, Corvettes lacked a strong operational backbone and efficient supply chain to weather the storm. At the same time, suburban malls were filling up with stronger competitors, including discount juggernauts like Kmart. By the end of the decade, mismanagement and financial strain pushed the company to the brink. Attempts to modernize the stores came too late, and in 1980, E.J. Corvette closed its doors for good. What was once hailed as the future of discount retailing became a textbook case of ambition outpacing execution. The fall of E.J. Corvette carries an important lesson. Being a pioneer does not guarantee long-term success. The company helped introduce Americans to the idea of discount shopping, paving the way for Walmart, Target, and Costco, but it could not adapt to a retail world that was evolving faster than it could keep up. Today, Corvettes is remembered less for its failure and more for its role in reshaping American consumer culture during the post-war boom. W.T. Grant, 1906-1976, 70 years to retail's biggest collapse. In the early 20th century, W.T. Grant Company was a shining star of American retail. Founded in 1906 by William Thomas Grant, the chain quickly grew by offering affordable merchandise for everyday Americans. Grant believed strongly in the motto, "A square deal for every customer," and his stores embodied that philosophy. From the very beginning, W.T. Grant focused on the growing middle and working class, providing clothing, housewares, toys, and general goods at reasonable prices. For decades, the model worked beautifully. By the 1950s and 1960s, W.T. Grant had become one of the largest department store chains in the United States. Its stores dotted downtowns, shopping districts, and later suburban malls. At its peak, the chain operated more than 200 stores across the country, employing tens of thousands of workers. For many Americans, shopping at Grant's was a familiar and comforting experience. It wasn't glamorous like Macy's, but it was reliable, somewhere between a five and dime and a full department store. However, beneath the surface, trouble was brewing. The biggest problem was Grant's reckless credit policy. In an effort to compete with other growing discount retailers and build customer loyalty, the company introduced its own store credit program. But instead of carefully screening borrowers, W.T. Grant offered credit to virtually anyone who asked, regardless of financial stability. By the late 1960s, millions of customers were carrying balances they had little chance of paying back. For a time, this made sales figures look fantastic, but those sales were built on bad debt. Meanwhile, the retail landscape was shifting dramatically. Chains like Kmart and Woolco were reinventing discount shopping with larger stores, better selection, and lower prices. Walmart, still in its early years, was preparing to expand nationwide with an ultra-efficient model. Grant's, in contrast, seemed stuck in the past. Its suburban expansions often landed in poorly chosen locations where sales couldn't sustain the overhead. Stores became cluttered with uninspired merchandise, and shoppers began to drift toward competitors who offered more variety, better quality, and a more modern experience. The financial strain worsened in the 1970s as the U.S. economy entered a difficult period marked by inflation and recession. Instead of slowing down and rethinking strategy, W.T. Grant continued to grow recklessly. The company piled up debt, betting that sales would catch up. But sales never did. By 1975, the company had over $1 billion in debt, a staggering amount at the time, and an inventory full of goods it could not sell. In 1976, after 70 years in business, the unthinkable happened. W.T. Grant filed for bankruptcy. The collapse was catastrophic. More than 1,073 stores closed almost overnight, leaving 83,000 employees out of work. For decades, Grant had been a familiar part of main streets and shopping plazas across America, and suddenly it was gone. At the time, it was the second largest corporate bankruptcy in U.S. history, surpassed only by Penn Central Railroad. The aftermath was brutal. Investors lost millions, creditors scrambled to recover what they could, and entire communities were left with empty storefronts. To many business analysts, the fall of W.T. Grant became a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked growth, poor financial controls, and the seductive trap of easy credit. What had once been a respected institution in American retail ended in complete ruin. Today, W.T. Grant is remembered not for its decades of service to American families, but for its spectacular failure. Business schools study its case as an example of how short-term strategies and mismanaged credit systems can destroy even the most established companies. The legacy of W.T. Grant is clear. In retail, survival depends not only on customer loyalty, but also on discipline, adaptability, and sound financial management, qualities the company abandoned in its final decades. Gimbels, 1887-1987, a century of tradition lost. For nearly 100 years, Gimbels stood as one of America's most iconic department stores. Founded in 1887 in Milwaukee by Adam Gimbel, the chain quickly expanded to Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and eventually New York City. By the early 20th century, Gimbels had become synonymous with variety, affordability, and big city shopping. At its peak, it operated dozens of stores across the United States and employed tens of thousands of workers. To generations of Americans, Gimbels was more than a store. It was a shopping experience and a part of everyday culture. Perhaps the most famous aspect of Gimbels was its legendary rivalry with Macy's. The two retail titans went head-to-head in New York, standing just blocks apart in Manhattan. Gimbels branded itself as the People's Store, offering practical prices and broad selection, while Macy's cultivated a more upscale image. Their rivalry even inspired the famous phrase, "Does Macy's tell Gimbels?" which became shorthand for cutthroat competition in business. Gimbels was also immortalized in the classic holiday film Miracle on 34th Street, 1947, cementing its place in American pop culture. For decades, Gimbels thrived by catering to working and middle-class families. It was known for its wide selection of clothing, furniture, appliances, and household goods. The stores were bustling hubs where generations shopped for everything from school clothes to wedding gifts. In New York, the annual Thanksgiving Day Parade, launched by Gimbels before Macy's took it over and made it iconic, was a beloved tradition. Yet despite its history and reputation, Gimbels entered the second half of the 20th century facing enormous challenges. The rise of suburban shopping malls after World War II shifted consumer behavior. Families no longer wanted to trek into crowded downtowns for department store shopping. Instead, they preferred the convenience of suburban malls, where they could park easily and enjoy a more modern shopping environment. Gimbels, heavily invested in large urban locations with high operating costs, struggled to adapt. Another issue was failure to modernize. By the 1970s and 1980s, retail was becoming more competitive and specialized. Chains like Sears, JCPenney, and Kmart dominated Middle America, while luxury department stores such as Bloomingdale's attracted wealthier shoppers. Discount giants like Walmart and Target were also emerging, offering lower prices and efficient distribution. In comparison, Gimbels felt old-fashioned, its stores outdated, and its merchandise uninspired. The 1980s consumer boom proved to be the final nail in the coffin. While many retailers used the decade to reinvent themselves with fresh branding and modern shopping environments, Gimbels clung to its old ways. Shoppers who once filled Gimbels stores were now heading to suburban malls, discounters, or trendier department stores. The company's sales fell year after year, and profits evaporated. In 1986, Gimbels was sold to the British-American conglomerate Beatus, which also owned Saks Fifth Avenue. Beatus attempted to streamline operations by consolidating some of Gimbels' locations with Saks, but it quickly became clear that the brand itself had lost all momentum. By 1987, after a century in business, all Gimbels stores were closed. The closure marked the end of an era in New York retail history. The fall of Gimbels was more than just a corporate failure. It symbolized the decline of the grand urban department store tradition that had defined American consumer culture for decades. Where once towering downtown department stores represented the height of retail sophistication, by the 1980s, they were being replaced by suburban malls and discount chains. Today, Gimbels lives on only in memory, old advertisements, and films like Miracle on 34th Street. Its story serves as a reminder that even the most legendary names in retail can disappear if they fail to evolve with changing consumer habits. A century of tradition could not withstand the tidal wave of suburbanization, discount culture, and modern retail efficiency. Alexander's 1928-1992, the fall of a New York giant. In the bustling streets of the Bronx in 1928, a young immigrant named George Farkas opened a store that would soon become a New York institution, Alexander's department store. Named after his father, Alexander, the store quickly gained popularity by offering affordable merchandise at a time when America was heading into the Great Depression. Its no-frills, bargain-first approach resonated deeply with working-class families, and Alexander's carved out a reputation as the place to go for low prices in the city that never sleeps. For decades, Alexander's was synonymous with discount shopping in New York City. Unlike Macy's or Bloomingdale's, which catered to the aspirational middle class with a more polished image, Alexander's thrived by promising cheap prices, even if it meant sacrificing ambiance, customer service, or quality. By the 1960s, the chain had expanded throughout the New York metropolitan area, anchoring major intersections and even securing a coveted flagship location across from Bloomingdale's on 59th Street in Manhattan. To millions of New Yorkers, Alexander's was a household name. The chain was known for crowded aisles, basic layouts, and merchandise piled high. The stores lacked the elegance of department store rivals, but that didn't matter to loyal shoppers who came looking for deals. Parents often dragged their children through the aisles for school clothes, coats, and household items. Shopping at Alexander's wasn't glamorous. It was practical, gritty, and uniquely tied to the New York experience. Yet, as the decades wore on, Alexander's image as a bargain destination began to work against it. By the 1970s, New York City was in decline, with crime rates soaring, urban neighborhoods deteriorating, and middle-class families fleeing to the suburbs. Alexander's stores, many located in struggling urban areas, suffered from this demographic shift. Instead of expanding into the new suburban malls where the next generation of consumers was shopping, Alexander's clung to its traditional city footprint. The company's merchandise also became a liability. While it had once been known for unbeatable prices, by the 1980s its products were increasingly viewed as cheap and low quality. Shoppers were no longer satisfied with just bargains. They wanted better designed, fashionable, and reliable goods. Rivals like Macy's reinvented themselves to appeal to aspirational shoppers, while discount powerhouses like Walmart and Target expanded nationally with better logistics and lower costs. Alexander's, stuck in between, lost its relevance. The physical state of the stores made matters worse. Many Alexander's locations became infamous for their dingy lighting, cluttered displays, and unappealing environments. Shopping there felt like a chore rather than an experience. Younger generations of consumers gravitated toward malls, boutiques, or discounters with fresher presentations. Alexander's, meanwhile, clung to its outdated model, failing to modernize its stores or invest in customer experience. By the late 1980s, financial pressure mounted. Management tried to pivot, but it was too late. Even the iconic flagship across from Bloomingdale's couldn't rescue the brand from its crumbling reputation. By 1992, Alexander's shut down completely, ending more than 6 decades of retail history. Ironically, the company's real estate holdings turned out to be more valuable than its retail business. Many of its former properties were redeveloped into profitable shopping centers and office towers. In fact, the real estate arm outlived the retail chain itself, generating wealth long after the last Alexander's store had closed. Today, Alexander's is remembered less for the shopping experience it provided and more as a symbol of urban decline in New York during the 1970s and 1980s. It illustrates how a brand can dominate in one era but collapse in another if it fails to evolve. From its crowded aisles in the Bronx to its fall in Manhattan, Alexander's story is a cautionary tale of how clinging to the past and neglecting modernization can doom even the biggest names in retail. Bradley's, 1958-2001. Discounts that weren't enough. In 1958, a modest discount store opened in New London, Connecticut. Its name was Bradley's, a play on Bradley International Airport, which inspired its branding. At first glance, it seemed like just another regional department store. But Bradley's quickly grew into one of the most recognized discount retailers in the northeastern United States. For decades, families across New England, New Jersey, and New York knew Bradley's as a convenient, no-frills place to buy clothing, housewares, toys, and seasonal items at prices that promised value. The store's formula was simple: bargains for everyday families. By the 1970s, Bradley's had become part of the everyday shopping routine for millions. It didn't have the glamour of Macy's or the national power of Sears, but it thrived by being accessible, practical, and affordable. Bright red signage, wide aisles, and large parking lots gave it the familiar look of a regional discount chain. Customers often associated Bradley's with big sales events, clearance racks, and convenient one-stop shopping. At its peak, Bradley's operated over 100 stores along the East Coast, positioning itself as a solid competitor in the mid-tier discount space. It was the kind of place parents visited to grab school clothes for the kids, holiday decorations in December, or cookware for a new apartment. For many families, especially in New England, Bradley's was woven into the fabric of suburban life. But behind the comforting familiarity, Bradley's faced deep structural problems that ultimately led to its downfall. The first major issue was its confusing identity. The chain often positioned itself somewhere between a discount store like Kmart and a traditional department store like J.C. Penney. This lack of clarity left Bradley's vulnerable. Shoppers didn't know whether to treat it as a bargain destination or a more upscale experience, and as competitors sharpened their identities, Bradley's fell into a blurry middle ground. Another problem was location strategy. Many Bradley's stores were built in neighborhoods and shopping centers that thrived in the 1960s and 1970s, but declined in later decades. As middle-class families migrated to newer suburban developments, Bradley's was often left behind in areas with shrinking economic activity. The stores, once busy and profitable, began to feel outdated and underutilized. Then came the onslaught of national discount giants. By the late 1980s and 1990s, Walmart and Target were expanding aggressively, bringing with them modern stores, efficient distribution systems, and unbeatable pricing power. Bradley's, by contrast, was hampered by high operating costs, inefficient logistics, and limited geographic reach. Walmart and Target could leverage national scale, while Bradley's remained a regional chain with fewer resources. The merchandise mix also hurt the company. Shoppers often complained about inconsistent product quality and slow inventory turnover. Unlike Target, which began to position itself as a cheap chic destination with stylish yet affordable goods, Bradley's never cultivated a unique appeal. Its stores looked tired, its offerings generic, and its reputation stagnant. Financial troubles soon followed. Bradley's filed for bankruptcy once in the early 1990s, but managed to reorganize and reopen. For a brief time, it appeared the chain might recover, but the growing dominance of Walmart, the rise of big-box specialty stores, and a sluggish regional economy proved too much to overcome. By the late 1990s, Bradley's was barely hanging on. Shoppers who once flocked to its stores now preferred Target's fresher image or Walmart's unbeatable prices. In 2001, Bradley's filed for bankruptcy again, this time for good, and all of its remaining 105 stores were closed. Thousands of employees lost their jobs, and communities across the Northeast lost a familiar name that had once been a cornerstone of suburban retail life. Today, Bradley's lives on only in memory for those who grew up shopping there. Its rise and fall highlight a critical truth of retail. Regional popularity and brand familiarity are not enough when national giants with scale, efficiency, and sharper branding move in. Bradley's, despite its decades of service, simply couldn't adapt to the new retail reality of the 1990s. Caldor, 1951-1999, 48 years of losing struggle. Caldor was a discount store chain that operated primarily in the American Northeast, known for the slogan, "Where shopping is a pleasure." Why it failed: geographically limited expansion, inability to compete with Walmart and Kmart old and poorly maintained stores, inefficient distribution system, lack of market differentiation. It closed all 145 stores in 1999, becoming another victim of the Walmartization of American retailing. 8. Ames, 1958-2002, the discount roller coaster. Ames department stores grew rapidly in the 1960s and 1970s through aggressive acquisitions, eventually becoming the fourth largest discount chain in the U.S. 2 bankruptcies, 1990 and 2002. Expansion too quickly without proper integration. Purchase of struggling chains, such as Zare. Disastrous inventory management location in small towns with no population growth. The second bankruptcy in 2002 definitively closed its operations. 9. Venture stores, 1970-1998, the adventure that went wrong. Venture was a Midwestern discount store chain trying to compete with large national chains. Why it failed: very competitive regional market, lack of economies of scale compared to national competitors, difficulty negotiating prices with suppliers, stores too small for the emerging big box model, family management unsuitable for large-scale operations. It closed its doors in 1998, selling its best locations to Target. 10. Jamesway, 1961-1995. The wrong path. Jamesway tried to be a smaller version of Kmart, operating primarily in rural areas and small towns in the Northeast. Why it failed? Copycat business model without innovation, very limited target market, difficulty attracting big brands due to smaller size. Competition from Walmart expanding into rural areas, financial mismanagement during the 1990s recession. Declared bankruptcy in 1995, failing to find a sustainable niche. 11. Tom M. Kahn, 1922-1996, had over 1,400 stores at its peak in the 1960s. Tom McCann was one of the largest shoe chains in the US, operating in shopping malls and high streets across the country. Why it failed? Undifferentiated commodity product, inconsistent shoe quality, competition from department stores and footwear specialists, changing buying patterns, consumers preferring variety in one store, high rent costs in shopping malls. In 1996, the parent company decided to close all remaining stores, but Tom McCann footwear is available in Kmart stores. 12. Two Guys, 1946-1982. Two Guys, many problems. Two Guys from Harrison, the full name, started as an appliance store in New Jersey and expanded to become a chain of discount stores. Why it failed? Unsuccessful attempt at diversification. They even sold cars. Family management unsuitable for a complex operation. Location primarily in declining urban areas. Fierce competition from better managed chains. Persistent labor problems. It closed in 1982, serving as yet another example of how ambition without planning can destroy a successful family business. 1950s America forgotten daily habits, milk delivery drive-ins, front